I'm Mark Hennick. This is So-Called Normal. Hey folks, welcome to So-Called Normal. Today on the show, I have Paul Nadeau. I saw Paul at TEDx Toronto a couple of years ago and really loved his talk. Paul is a business negotiations and conflict resolution expert. That's his official title, I think. But he's also a crisis negotiator, a hostage negotiator. He's got I think, still new book out called Take Control of Your Life, Rescue Yourself and Live the Life You Deserve. We talk a lot about his book and especially about his work as a negotiator. We talk about, all the times that he had to intervene and save kids' lives who were suicidal, for example, when he was a police officer, about his experiences in finding the humanity in terrorists when he was overseas. So to really get into that, to get into his history, I think was a fascinating conversation of psychology and of mental health, and he's so motivational as well. So if you get a chance to see him speak, definitely go out and do that. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know you will too. So here's Paul Nadeau on So-Called Normal. All right. So why don't we dive right in? Tell me about yourself.
Okay. Well, that's a loaded question.
Is it?
Yeah. It is, because I think we're also very unique and complicated at times. And I find myself that I'm always rediscovering, myself, or putting my mind to trying to better myself. Going back into my history as a young boy. I grew up in a home in which my father was very abusive. Mm-hmm. He was a violent alcoholic. He used to beat me and my mom and my older brother up all the time. And I talk about beatings. They were pretty severe. And I remember feeling so incapable of protecting myself and my mom and my brother.
And would he only do that when he was drinking?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But he was drinking all the time when he was home.
Right.
So he was an alcoholic. So I don't think there was a day that went by without him drinking.
Really?
So we knew when he was coming home, we had to be quiet. We had to turn off the TV. He didn't want us turning on the TV. He'd always find out that we were watching it. And then the beatings would happen, yelling and screaming. He was Jekyll and Hyde. Outside in the public, he was a gentleman. He was a ladies' man. He was a handsome man and had a lot of friends. But inside the home was a completely different story.
Do you think it was the type of thing where people suspected it but just never said anything because that's not what you're supposed to do? Or did he really hide it?
I think he really hid it.
Yeah.
Judging by, and I was a young boy, but judging by the amount of friends that he had, there might have been a couple of people that suspected it, but we're talking the 60s, right? Like where, if you did recognize that somebody was being abused in a home, you likely wouldn't say anything about it. And it wasn't much help.
Yeah.
And my mom was, she was French. So part of a French community in a small, area, like an English, predominantly English community. She's French, so she's only got a few people she can go to.
Right.
No car. Had to take the bus, that kind of thing. It was tough.
Jeez, the isolation, yeah.
Really. My mom was an angel, and she went through a lot. And I remember at the age of 7, I told myself that when I grew up, I was going to become a policeman, so I wanted to arrest people like my dad.
Wow.
That was about at the age of 7. And he never had any faith in me, and neither did my school. The teachers back then, I went to a school, and all the teachers would not support. They wouldn't even look for abused kids, but I acted out. I acted out because this is the only place I could actually act out.
How did you act out? What were the types of things that you would do?
Oh, geez, I would disrupt the class. She or he, whoever was teaching the class, I'd get up in the middle of the class, walk, while they're teaching a lesson, go and borrow a pen or something like that, and come back, or I'd take a ball and start bouncing it in the classroom. They'd pull me out, give me a spanking, bring me back to class. One day I went out with it was a summer day, and I went out with a carton, an empty milk carton. And it was my job, in my mind, to collect as many grasshoppers as I possibly could collect in that little carton and bring it back into class. Yeah. And 10 minutes after class started, put the carton and open it on the ground. Oh, yeah. And then we have, we have these little insects jumping all over the place. Yeah. And the teachers all look at me because it's right beside me. I've got the evidence there. Sure. That was me. You know, I did everything that I possibly could, to get in trouble. Yeah. And was told by my teachers, you're never going to amount to anything. And this is the thing. If we hear a message long enough, or we tell ourselves a message long enough, we begin to believe it. Mm-hmm. We begin to internalize it. So I was being told I wouldn't amount to anything. I was being, pushed into the next grade simply because I think that my teachers didn't want to have me in their class the next year. Mm-hmm. And my grades were 40s and 50s. They were just barely passing by or failing.
Many friends, big social group at school?
No, I didn't.
No.
You know what? I didn't. I got beaten by a lot of the students in school. And I think it's because I was the troublemaker and the bad boy. And I just socially, I didn't fit in.
Yeah.
So that was one thing too. Now, in grade 7, this was a turning point for me. One of my teachers, male teacher, who didn't like me much, this is at an age where I'm starting to like girls, and I guess I'm thinking about myself more as maybe I can straighten out a little bit. So he announces to the class, he says, "We have a test on Friday, and I expect everybody in this class to pass, except for you, Nadeau. I already know you're going to fail."
He said that in front of the class?
In front of the class.
Wow.
And that hit me. That hit me hard because I felt embarrassed. The girls are looking, the guys are looking, everybody's, giggling and that kind of stuff. So I went back, and that weekend, that night, I studied as much as I possibly could for my little brain, because I wasn't accustomed to studying.
Right.
When I tried to study, nothing sank in. I remember when I was even younger, my mom would cry with me because I couldn't retain anything. But after being challenged, and I don't think that he intended that as a challenge.
No.
Because he didn't care that much for me. This is a man who picked me up on one end of a class and tossed me like a bag of potatoes, where I slid across, a newly waxed floor into a wall, with a bunch of shoes. That's the kind of guy that he was.
Right.
Did not like me. I wrote his test, and as was customary when he had graded them, he would start calling the student with the least, the least amount of marks to stand up and walk, the walk of shame and pick up your paper. So if you did poorly, you were the first one to be called. You'd pick up your paper, and everybody would look, and they would know exactly what you had because he'd announce it. Right. It was usually like this: Nadeau, 48. And I would stand up and start walking, to pick up my paper. Everybody, was used to that. I was used to that. I had conditioned myself to believe that I was a loser because everybody had been telling me this. My mom certainly didn't, but my dad didn't say anything to encourage me. The teachers didn't say anything to encourage me. So, it happens where some of us slip, into the cracks, and we start to believe or manifest in our own mind that we're not good enough,
Right.
So on this particular occasion, he started, calling the lowest mark, and it wasn't me. Second one, it wasn't me. Third one, he's going through. And about halfway through the class, my fellow students are looking over at me, and they're kind of pointing in my direction. And, they're raising their shoulders, you're not up yet? And I'm looking at them, shaking my head, have no idea what's going on here, And two things it came to my mind. Number one, I either did really bad, super bad, and he was going to wait to insult me in front of the classroom, and it would be the insult of all insults, and I would just die. And the second thing that I was thinking of is, I think I passed, and I think I did good because I knew those answers. So he's going along, and I have a cousin, and she was competing with one other girl in class. They were the Browners, and they always had the highest marks. And I remember she got called. The third last in the classroom to be called was her. And there was only two other students. Giselle Calder, who was the Browner of the class, the one who usually had the top mark, and me. And now I had no idea what was going to happen. But I was next to be called. I had the second highest mark in class. Now, I am no genius. I am just an average kid, But that was a defining moment for me, Mark, because it was in that instant that I acknowledged to myself that I was capable of doing something greater than I had thought that I could. Yeah. And this happened in grade 7, for me. And I started to believe in myself. And ever since then, I applied myself, and I would work that extra, because I don't have a photographic memory. For me, memorization takes hours, but I applied myself and I did it.
Right.
And from that point on, my life changed because I started to change the internal monologue that I had in my head, the one that said, you tell yourself, hey, you're never going to amount to anything. Nobody likes you. Everybody hates you. You're no good, what are you even doing here?
Yeah. And then you just got a little bit of evidence to the contrary, and you're able to then reframe.
That's it. Yeah. And that's a perfect way of saying it. Reframe what you thought, I have a friend, Stuart Knight, he says, boycott what you thought, if you thought of yourself as a failure or as someone who's unworthy, it's time to change that internal monologue we have into something positive and prove it to yourself.
Yeah. Well, and at that junction, when he said that he expected you to fail, you could have gone two ways. You could have chosen the way that you did, or you could have just agreed and fit that mold.
You're right.
And you didn't.
You're right. And let's take a look at what you just said, because you're right. There was a crossroads where I could have gone either way. The motivation for me was I liked girls. That was the first time I was kind of like, you know what, maybe if I change this bad boy attitude, and actually showed my classmates that I could, be something or be someone, it might change things for me.
Finding what you cared about, at least in that moment.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's why I say, so when you ask me about my life, that's how it really started. And that was the pivoting point for me in grade 7. And I think we all find that point, or most of us find that point where we begin to believe in ourselves. We are imperfect people living in an imperfect world. We, nothing is perfect. We might think it is, but I don't believe anything is perfect. It's just because of the fact that we live in an imperfect, world.
Now, how much of you, though, especially as a young kid, in a house where you had no control over some pretty traumatic circumstances and experiences, part of, I think, the reason that sometimes people go into law enforcement, maybe you can correct this if it's inaccurate, is to try to control that, to try to put some sort of authority or some structure, give some meaning to something that doesn't seem to make any sense. When you're being beaten at home and bullied at school and nobody believes in you, well, maybe then I can impose some sort of control on this situation. Was that part of the motivation, maybe?
For me, no. But I've heard that before. So you are right. Everybody is motivated to work, I guess, in a public field. Either doctor, nurse, ambulance attendants, police, whatever, fire department. Yeah, we're motivated by different things, and but a lot, and I think. I've heard this said before that a lot of people who are, in professions that help others are people who needed the help themselves.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I guess it's similar roots. Yeah.
And that you may have hit it right on the nose. That might have been it for me. Is that I can't control this, but maybe I can help control something else for somebody else. This is what I'm giving back. To the world. Yeah. Is that I'm going to go out there and I'm going to wear my Batman suit and I'm going to save the world. And you realize it's you can do a little bit.
It's a bit more complicated than that. Yeah.
A little bit.
Okay. So things start to turn around for you into the police academy straight out of high school, or?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. No, sorry. I went to college for 2 years.
Okay.
So I took a law enforcement course, and I really enjoyed that. And the moment I turned 21 was the moment I applied, to become a policeman. By then, I couldn't arrest my dad because he had killed himself when I was 17.
Really?
So yeah, he had tried twice. The second time the first time I found him, the second time I wasn't around. But
how did that impact you? Hearing of your father's death, especially with such a complicated history.
I kind of felt it was coming. Because he would say, my mother had the courage to leave him. And it wasn't long before my father found another girlfriend, bought himself another house. But I could tell that something in him had died. He was a man that needed power and control. And he had power and control over his family. My mom, my brother, myself, the whole family, my sisters. the moment that power and control was taken away from him, I think he lost, he lost something. He could no longer control a family. He could no longer be the power, the dominant individual who could do what he pleased.
Right.
And when I started to see him afterwards, I could tell that he had slipped into a deep depression. And, I watched his hands as he would rub his hands, back and forth, like as he's talking. And that strength that he once had, his shoulders were now slouched. And he would say something like, one of these days, you're going to read about me in the newspapers. And I kind of thought, read about you in the newspapers, that probably means the obituary, and I'm saying, Dad, why don't you get some help, this kind of thing. And
he wasn't open to that.
He wasn't open to that. No.
That's often, I think, one of the biggest tragedies is that we want to help people, of course, but you can't do recovery to people or for people. You can't do it to them against their will.
No, you can't. No, you can't. You can, you're right. You can simply, put down some seeds, by being open and saying, listen, I'm here for you. We all need to hear that because I believe that it doesn't matter how strong you are or how successful you are. And we've seen evidence of this, of really successful people who were depressed and not happy, unfulfilled, and ended up committing suicide, So I think each and every one of us need those seeds to be planted by people who show you that they are genuinely interested in helping to support you, to help support you in finding the answers that work for you.
Yeah.
Because we become hostages to different thoughts and beliefs. But there is a way of becoming unhostaged, and it's by what we can do internally, but it also comes from the help and guidance of others. We're not alone. Like I said earlier, we are imperfect people living in an imperfect world. I imagine, this is my imagination, is that we are in a big boat, a rowboat, and we're all sitting beside each other, rowing away. We've got a particular destination we're going for. And it's not easy. You're sitting beside me, Mark, and you and I are rowing. And one day I am completely exhausted and I cannot row. And you turn to me and you say, hey, brother, Paul, let me row for you today. Let me take your burden. Let me help you out here. And I say, Mark, thank you. I need the rest. And you take over for me. Now, 2 days go by. You look exhausted. And I turn to you and I say, Mark, why don't you take a break? Let me row for you. So this is what I imagine that we each have a responsibility to do, is when we recognize that somebody may be going through something difficult, to step up and say, you're not alone. And let me take some of the burden for you, or unburden yourself and tell me what it is, that you're going through. Yeah. And, I'll be here for you. And if I can't do it, I'll recommend somebody who can, but you're not alone. We all have to recognize at some point, that we're not alone. And we were never intended to be alone. If we were intended to be alone, I think we would not have been born as dependent people. Yeah. We were dependent on a mother to nurture us. We were dependent on a family to take care of us. So we went from being so dependent to being taught how to be independent.
Right. So when you did finally become a police officer after college, after you go through the academy, you must have started to encounter people in psychological distress pretty early on in your career, even people who were suicidal, yes?
Yes. Yeah.
So how would that, what was that, if you even remember, what was that first experience or those early experiences like, especially with your own personal history with your dad?
Well, one of the, it's funny, the one that sticks out in my mind was being a patrol sergeant, being called to a 911, and I was the first officer to arrive, and we had just heard that there was a man in distress. When I got to the door, I opened it up, and because it was ajar slightly, and so I pushed it open, and I announced myself as a police officer. Everybody okay? That kind of thing. You don't know exactly what you're getting into. So the hand's on the gun. You don't know if this is an ambush. You don't know, if you're going to need to take immediate action. Who's in there? It could be anything from a murder to whatever. And I heard this voice calling me up. Come on in, officer. Come on in. So I slowly walked in and I says, are you okay? Is everything good? I'm looking around. He says, come on up. And I'm walking towards these stairs. And as I start to to get to the bottom of the stairs and looking up, I could see the top of the stairs, and this chair was at the top of the stairs. And it was one of these metal frame old chairs. And when I got a little closer, I could see the entire man now. He was standing on this seatless, small metal chair. He had a bottle of Jack Daniels in his one hand. He had a box cutter with a sharp blade in the other. He had a noose around his neck. Mm. And he was clearly drunk. And he was unsteady. And because there was no seat, I could see the seat tilting from left to right. And he says, "Glad you're here. I needed a witness." Mm. And it was one of those moments like, oh, now what do I do? You know, I was not a crisis negotiator. Mm-hmm. I was not a hostage negotiator, never been trained in any of that. But instinctively, it was like, hey, what's your first name? Let's talk this through. You know, I don't need to be a witness to anything. What are you thinking of doing? So the next 3/4 of an hour, and I finally got some backup, but nobody interfered because now I was into a negotiation with a suicidal man who had told me that he poured his heart out to me. His marriage had broken down. He had turned to alcohol. He had all these distresses in his life, and I managed to give him a little bit of hope. And I encountered. I realized that once we give people hope, and we solidify that they're not alone, mm-hmm. That there are other people out there who are willing, to lend a hand and to help, and that I could put them in touch with these people. Mm. And that, committing suicide is permanent, and I would be very, very direct with them because I worked at one point, and I'd forgotten this for many years. I worked on a suicidal hotline when I was 17.
Really?
Yeah, 17.
Wow. Before or after your dad died?
Right after my dad died.
Right after.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, because I started doing some research after I spoke to my. Actually, I think it was around 17. It was right after my dad died. They actually got me on the line. So I have no idea. Like they'd never take a 17-year-old and put him on a suicide line now. Right. But they did. I was 17, 18, and I was doing that. Yeah. So and one of the things I remember being taught was that sometimes you have to use the dirty language. Mm. The dirty language is be the honest. It's not like, are you thinking of
maybe
taking,
possibly,
yeah. Are you thinking of leaving here?
Right.
What does leaving here mean?
Or hurting yourself? No, they're not thinking about hurting themselves. They're thinking about killing themselves.
Yes,
right?
And you have to say it.
You have to ask directly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you do.
So that man, did he live?
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
he did.
Did you ever hear what happened to him after that?
I didn't. No.
It's an interesting thing because the stories that I tell many, many times are how I was saved. By a complete stranger who was not a professional. And I learned many, many years later that there was a police officer standing behind me the whole time. I was standing on the edge of a bridge. Right. This complete stranger grabbed me and pulled me back. And I felt a hand on the back of my jacket as this other guy was standing next to me the whole time. Similar kind of situation. They probably didn't want to pull him out because he had established a relationship with me. Right. But that there was also a female, I believe, police officer standing behind me the whole time that I had no idea was even there. Right. And it was more than 12 years later before I finally actually met this guy again, circled back with him, and was finally able to thank him for what he did for me.
That's an amazing story.
Have you ever, with any of the people you've encountered, been able to reconnect with them and share a moment with them after they were in that vulnerable place?
Yes, I have. And a lot of it was with victims of crime, because I worked in the sexual assault and child abuse unit for several years, and a job I really loved. I hated hearing the stories, but what I loved about the job was making the connection with a victim, mm-hmm. male or female, and being establishing a rapport. And giving them hope and courage and taking the case on, arresting the bad guy, getting the confession. That was great. But I dealt with some victims who, young girls or, they didn't want to live anymore. Right. Because we had established a rapport, they opened up to me. It's difficult for a victim, especially a female victim, to open up to a male officer and tell what she's going through or what she went through, some of the ugliest and dirtiest things, but to disclose it, because she feels a trust or, with someone, a complete stranger.
And do you think that the uniform, if you were a uniformed officer, did that help or did it hinder?
No, I was in plain clothes.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah, I was in plain clothes. And depending on who, the victim was, I would dress accordingly, sure. Not always in a suit and tie. It doesn't always work in a suit and tie. And I don't want to remind people that they're talking to, a person in authority.
Well, and this is what I was wondering, if the authority thing got in the way, but it sounds like you accommodated for that.
Yeah, I did accommodate for that, but also I found that I could actually connect with people who were going through that trauma, and maybe it's because I went through some of it too. But there are a couple of passages in the book that I wrote in which I remember, once I'd meet a victim 2 or 3 times. We're on, first name basis. I would never get, somebody to call me Detective Nadeau.
Right.
No, you know what? My name is Paul. And that's even as a hostage negotiator, is like, hey, you're the hostage taker. Hey, John, my name is Paul. You can call me Paul. Do you mind if I call you John? We personalize it, and that way people feel more comfortable, using first names.
Yeah.
But with my victims, after meeting them 2 or 3 times, if I felt that they were still hostages to their circumstances and they hostage themselves, to a belief that maybe they did something wrong, it was their fault, and it wasn't. We all hear, well, if she hadn't done this or she hadn't been there. No, guess what? It's one person's fault. It's the person who assaulted the individual who is guilty here, not the victim. I want to remind them of that. Yeah. And I want to remind them that they have a choice. So I would bring in 2 T-shirts. One T-shirt had the word victim printed right on the front. The other T-shirt had the word survivor printed on the T-shirt. I don't know how I ever came up with this idea, but I started bringing these in. And I'd say, you know what? I'd say, the person's name, and I'd say, you have a choice to make here today. Because we may not see each other much anymore now, that the case, he's been arrested and everything, but you have a choice to pick what you want to be here today. I have 2 T-shirts. The one says victim. If you pick this one, you don't have to wear it. But it's going to come out in everything that you do. It's going to come out in your relationships. It's going to come out in the beliefs that you have in yourself. And it's going to prevent you from living, a fulfilled and happy life. On the other hand, if you pick this one that says survivor, what you do is you take back your power and control, which was never taken away from you. It was just misplaced. And you tell the person who did this, they have no power over you. You're stronger than your circumstances, and you are a survivor. Not only are you a survivor, you're a super survivor, because nothing's going to ever keep you, down. You start to believe in yourself when you wear this one. You don't even have to wear it. It's going to be in your mind.
It's a mindset.
And my God, they would pick their survivor ones, and that's when I got the feedback. I'd get calls, 2-3 weeks later, Paul, it's working. And I'm saying, great, and, or they'd come back, especially the younger ones, they'd come back and with a card or something like that. Or one of them brought me a picture of a little girl that I hung on my wall in my office, and they had all signed the back of the picture, thank you, Detective Nadeau, for what you did. This all goes back to, and it was a long way to answer your question, but yeah, I did keep in touch with some of them and got some feedback later on, even years later.
Yeah, and I love this idea, and I've been preoccupied with this idea lately too of this dichotomy between acceptance and change, or this perceived dichotomy between acceptance and change. Because what I think that it means, and what it means in the tradition of an intervention called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, that you can accept what happened to you. That it's a fact. It did. No judgment, no, whatever, it did. But that's the first step in order to actually be able to change your life beyond that. If you're still denying that it happened to you, or if you're still identifying with being the victim, even though, yes, it did happen to you, we agree on that point. But if that becomes your identity, the victim identity, then you'll never actually change. You'll never move beyond it. Right. So, and it seems like, I think some people are hesitant to accept what happened to them as fact because they think it means that that's okay. But it's not okay that it happened to you. We're just accepting that it happened, right?
You're right.
And it's another one of those crossroads too. You can't control your circumstances always, but you can control what you do with your circumstances moving forward.
Precisely.
Right?
Yeah.
This was so it seems like this idea of hostage negotiation had been niggling at you for a while, whether it had been talking to the suicidal man, talking to these victims, until eventually you do in fact become a legit hostage negotiator.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
I certainly will. I love talking about this kind of stuff too. I think I realized, from after I began to believe in myself, I realized that I could actually talk with people. Mm. And what I mean by talk with people is just, seriously sit down and connect with them. And when I was in college, there was an exercise that one of our professors made us do. And he wanted us to sit down for 20 minutes and talk to somebody in the classroom and get them to open up. Mm. This was an exercise, get the person to open up. There was one girl in the classroom who didn't like me for whatever reason. I have no idea why she didn't like me, but she didn't.
Again, it starts with a girl.
It starts with a girl. Exactly. My God. Yeah. Yeah. There's a pattern here. Isn't there? Yeah. Oh, my God. Well, now, what does that mean? I think I need you to talk to me, man. But he put me with her deliberately.
Sure.
Now, I remember I told you that I started to believe myself. So I was one of the top students in that classroom. And maybe that was one of the reasons she didn't like me. But I got stuck with her. So her body language told it all. The crossed arms, like, I have to talk to you for the next 20 minutes or half an hour, whatever it was. This is not going to be fun. 20 minutes into that conversation, she's crying. And she's told me things that she's never told anybody in her life. Behavior
is information. There's something going on there. Yeah.
There's something. And she, the professor says, okay, the exercise is over. It's break time. She stands up, looks at the professor and says, it's not over for Paul and I. We're talking some more. As we sat down and we talked more. So I realized, I can connect with people.
So what did you do or what have you done since then to really help people open up? You mentioned body language, to the types of questions you ask. How did you get her, who's seemingly so shut down, to open up to you in that way?
Going back several years, but a lot of times, it is just looking at a person in the eyes, for, a minute, 2 minutes, just, it's not an uncomfortable stare. It's an inquisitive stare.
Right.
And along with your voice, your tonality, and there's something more going on. Ask questions. There's something more going on. There's something, I can feel something inside you. And right now, Mark, I can feel something inside you. When I look into your eyes, there's something going on. And people respond to that because you genuinely show the interest. Now, when I took this over to becoming a hostage, well, even dealing with victims of crime, I'd use the same approach. It's that I'm not here to judge you, not victims of crime, but even criminals. Not here to judge. I'd tell them right off the bat, you know what, Sam, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to find you guilty of anything. I just want to find out what happened, man.
Right.
I just want to find. So I would treat everybody the way I would want to be treated myself. When we start to do that, people connect, more quickly, and some of them jump in 150% and connect with you and tell you their deepest, darkest secrets. So when I realized that I had the ability of getting confessions from criminals or getting victims to open up to me, I thought, okay, well, this is good. So the moment a position came open for hostage negotiations, I thought, hey, that's kind of cool. Not too many people do that. And I remember the man on the noose, with the noose around his neck, that one call I told you about earlier. I remember him and I thought, that's what it's about. It's about crisis negotiate, people who are in crisis or people who are hostage takers. So I applied for it.
What's the difference, actually, if you're able to pin it down between a crisis call, somebody in crisis, and somebody who's taken a hostage?
They're both crisis, but there is a difference. Somebody who's taken a hostage may not have planned on taking a hostage unless that's what they do for a profession.
Right.
A lot of times you stumble into it. It's a robbery gone bad, or it's a domestic dispute, in which somebody grabbed a weapon and now they find themselves in a situation like this. So usually robbery, gang related, somebody's grabbed hostage. And now the hostage taker, who may not have planned, this to happen, they just wanted to make a clean break of things, find themselves, oh my God, now what do I do?
They're the hostage. Really.
They really are.
This master-slave kind of conversation.
Perfect. Yeah, and a great observation. You're absolutely right. They need help.
Yeah.
Because they can't think it through yet. Imagine a person in crisis. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when you are really in crisis, sometimes all you can hear is the sound of your own heart beating.
Sure.
And you have tunnel vision. And when people speak to you, you can't hear them speak at first. It's like you're listening to somebody while your head is immersed in a pool, and you can only hear, a little bit of the sound, coming out.
The best that I've been able to figure out, and I think a lot about this, is that it's this self-preservation mode that you have to zoom out all of these distractions because you're dying. You feel like you're at such risk that you need to focus in so narrowly. But as a result, you block out all the stuff that might possibly help.
Yes.
Or at least a lot of those things.
That's it. And the other, possibility to that, and I think you're right, is that, when we are, it's like when you're walking down the street at night and, all of a sudden it's very, very quiet. But then you hear a trash can, like fall down, like bam, it's a fight or flight,
right?
And that's, like everything inside you is, your heart rate, your perspiration. Like, now what do I do? Am I going to run from this threat, or I'm going to fight this threat?
And it amplifies it, because if it had just been a regular noisy day on the street, you probably wouldn't have heard that trash can.
That's right. That's right.
Interesting.
So what happens to us when we entered the fight or flight because of a crisis, that we're going into? It's the same idea, is that I've got to fight this crisis, or I'm going to give in to it. I'm a victim here. Mm-hmm. So as a hostage negotiator, we recognize, and or even as a crisis negotiator, we recognize that sometimes it's going to take 2 or 3 minutes to actually have the person acknowledge that they hear us.
Right.
Because, what they're going to hear is this. They're going to hear, Paul, here, help. That's all they're going to hear.
Right.
And you're going to say, did you get that?
Yeah, little cracks coming through.
Yeah. And no, I didn't get that. I'll say it again. Hi, my name is Paul. I'm a hostage negotiator. I'm a crisis negotiator. I'm here to help you. Are you okay? Hi, I'm Paul. And then you go over again. 2-3 times into it, they settle in, they hear you a little bit. Mm-hmm. So the difference between that hostage taker, he is in crisis, is that, he may not have planned, for that event, but, it happened. Mm-hmm. And now what do they do? They're looking for help, but they're also looking for escape. It's the fight or flight. Do I fight my way out, or do I?
I don't think that's different at all from people who are who are suicidal. And it, you hear from time to time that police officers and like many others don't receive or feel that they don't receive enough training to deal with people in mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. It seems like this is just anecdotal, but it seems like drawing on their own resources, their own expertise. I mean, police are the experts in hostage negotiation. That a lot of these skills are transferable. Exactly what you just said to me. If you were to take that conversation you had with somebody with a hostage and you had that same conversation with somebody who's suicidal, that I think would make a big difference. Mm-hmm. So to what degree are law enforcement trained on that kind of thing, generally speaking, not just the hostage negotiators?
Generally speaking, not enough. It's just there are so many different things that police officers nowadays have to, have some familiarity with, but to immerse themselves into extensive training, there just isn't the time for that. But what police departments are now doing, and this is going back several years, we started doing it when I was still a cop, is hiring mental health professionals to drive in a car with a trained crisis negotiator. Yeah. So in the event there was a situation, we'd have the mental health expert along with the police officer there helping.
But the funny thing is, I've met a lot of mental health professionals, both as a clinician, as a patient, as an advocate. I would say the minority of them had the kind of conversation that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It was mostly about, well, let's get you on the right medication. Let's make sure that your restraints are tight enough. Let's make sure, whatever else. It's had nothing to do with getting to know me or the other people that I was encountering.
Here's something I'd love to do. I speak, so I'm keynote speaker, but I'd love to go be invited by police departments to talk about how can we become more connected to our community. Because if I could talk to police officers, and one of the greatest discoveries that I ever made as a cop, and I write about it in my book, is that when I realized that we are more similar than we are different, it made a significant change in the way that I treated people.
Right.
Because I treated them like a lot of good books out there in every religion says, treat people the way that you would like to be treated. And we think that that's just a saying, but no. If you make that a part of your fabric and you treat people the way that you want to be treated. I remember sitting, and you asked me, do you remember anybody in distress or whatever in your early career? I was just on the job for 2 years, and I got stuck on the beat. I think I really pissed off my staff sergeant because nobody liked the beat, and he had put me there for about 3 days in a row, and that usually didn't happen. So I had the audacity of saying, "Hey, staff, you put me there for 3 days." He says, "Well, Nadeau, I'm going to put you there for 3 months. How do you like that?" That was my punishment. I actually loved the job after a while, except for standing in the snow, like a good little soldier at 2:00 in the morning, guarding an intersection. That was crazy. But anyways, and he did. Oh my God, I could tell you stories. But I'm walking one night. I remember one night it was about 2:00 in the morning. This is Oshawa. Nothing is happening at 2:00 in the morning in Oshawa way back when. Looking at 1979, 1980. And so I'm walking in uniform and it's 2:00 in the morning and I see this young man. He's seated on a curb in the downtown area. And he's just got his head slumped down. He's just kind of looking down at the ground. And so I turned down my radio. I don't want to startle him. I want to see what he's doing. It's not that I thought he was doing anything wrong. I just wanted to see what he was doing. So I kind of walk up behind him. He didn't hear me. And he was just sitting there and he was just kind of, thinking things through. So I happened to tap him on the shoulder. He jumped with this great big scream. He jumped, my God, you scared me to death. Hey, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? And I could tell right off the bat that he was not okay. So I sat down on the curb with him.
How could you tell? What was the sign?
It was his eyes. It was his body. Instinctively, I'd seen it. I'd seen that position in my father. I'd seen that hopelessness in my father. And I think that that's what it is. I think sometimes we can tell what a person is going through just by reading their body language. And my good friend Mark Bowden would tell you that because he's a body language expert.
He's going to be on the show next week, I think, or the week after.
Awesome. Yeah. You'll enjoy him too. But I sat down and I just started talking about, everything. And, just trying to connect with him. Hey, my name's Paul and, not a bad night out tonight. He's just making small talk and stuff like that. And I says, so what are you going through, man? What are you going through? Now, I'm a cop in uniform. This is an 18-year-old kid, and usually they're scared of cops, right? They don't want to have anything to do with them.
At 2 in the morning on a curb.
In the morning. Exactly. And he'd been drinking, he's 18. He wasn't drunk, but we talked and he says, before you came, I was just thinking how I was going to do it. How are you going to do what? I was going to kill myself. I was just deciding how I was going to do this, officer. Okay. Why don't you tell me what you're going through? We spent another 40 minutes just sitting there and chatting, him crying, me giving him a hug, a cop, at 2:00 in the morning. I wish that was televised, but he opened up to me and I said, I'm going to take you home now. And we're going to talk to your parents. And I did. I took him to his home. We woke up his parents and I made them aware of, what we had talked about and how he was feeling. And I got the biggest hug from him as I was leaving. So
he wasn't in the crisis had you think dissipated by the end? I mean, he still probably needed help, but he wasn't in imminent risk of
No, he wasn't.
harm.
No.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of times just knowing that somebody else is in your corner really helps people to we may not say the right things all the time,
right?
But there's a few things that we might say that resonate with people. And like I said, they're seeds. If I plant a seed, somebody else may come along and plant another seed, or somebody may have the water, and all the things that I've told you are lying maybe dormant in your mind until somebody comes along and reminds you of what somebody else said. It's like feeding, the seed.
It's cumulative, just like all the other stuff. If when you're a young guy and everybody's telling you that you're going to fail and that you're not worth it, and then that stuff adds up too.
It does.
So why not add to the other side of the scale?
Right.
Add all the positivity.
Yeah.
So now you take this experience and you go overseas.
Yes.
So you tell a captivating story in your TEDx talk.
Oh, yeah.
If you could share that.
Oh, for sure. I remember when I first had the opportunity, this was back in 2004 during the Iraqi War, where the United Nations, through the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were looking for peacekeepers. And they had contacted our police department because we were once in the RCMP peacekeeping branch as a possible, place to go for peacekeepers. But somehow we had broken away from that. But they recontacted us in 2004, and I had an inspector who was keen into it because he had done a mission before, so it got a new life. And when I saw an opportunity to train Iraqi police cadets in Jordan, I thought, hey, this is kind of cool, and it's it'll be my way of fighting terrorism. And so I ran it by my family, and I got their support, and I got accepted. So here I am, thinking I'd been watching too much CNN, so I thought everybody in the Middle East was going to kill me, and that everybody was one way, and it's funny how we can label certain individuals or communities or people with one paint of the brush, which is so...
Whether they're terrorists or even here at home, criminals or crazy people, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to sort people into easily definable boxes.
Homeless, you must not have a job. You must not want to work. That. Yes, we do, don't we? Yeah. And that's just so unfair.
So that must have been quite a shock for you then going there.
It was, because I met so many wonderful and tremendous people, and I lived in Amman and had an apartment with a couple of other guys, and it was great. So I went to the training academy and I started training Iraqi police cadets. But little did we know, we were training Sunnis, Shiites, and terrorists, because terrorists had infiltrated the academy. Iraq could not keep up, with the amount of people that they needed to protect their streets. So they would send us 3,000 police cadets every 8 weeks.
Wow.
So they'd scoop them up off the street. And the sad thing here, Mark, many sad things, was that they were scooping up people who had suicidal tendencies, people who had mental issues, because they weren't vetting them. They were just grabbing them. If you're male, you can hold on, to a gun. You're between 18 and 60. You're going to the academy, And to them, they would get $800, at the end of the training session for everybody in Iraq. That's a lot of money. 800 American dollars would go a long way for them. So some were happy to be there, whereas others had no clue why they were there. But I would, again, use that same approach with my classes. So the first thing is I'd say, listen, my name is Paul, and I'm not here to tell you anything. I'm just here to share some of my experiences and how I do work back at home, and hopefully it'll help you too. So I want this to be interactive. So I would like, I want to learn as much from you as I teach you. So how about we do this together? It's an honor for me to be here. I'm really happy to be here. Let's have fun. So I'd have one class for 2 weeks. And again, I'd have Sunnis, Shiites, and the odd terrorists in my class. And once the terrorists were identified, they were taken away, but some of them were not. It turns out, as it was, into my third month there was a young man in my classroom who was a terrorist, and I had no idea. He spoke English perfectly. And at first I could tell he was like a couple of the others in class. He didn't really want to hear what I had to say, but my opening speech was the same to him. I'm honored to be here. want to share my experiences. I want to learn from you. And what I would do too at the end of class, because I knew that these men, some of them were actually as young as 16, they'd managed to get in. Some of them were as old as 65, and some of them were frail. It was amazing. But they were put through so much physical training, 2 hours in the morning before they got to my class. So they're up at 4:30, they're exercising, they're doing all kinds of stuff before they even get to my class. And some of them were not in the greatest shape. So you can imagine they're going to a classroom, 55 to a class, in hard, uncomfortable chairs, listening to a talking head for 8 hours, and most of them are just going to want to put their head down on the, and sleep. So I had to make it entertaining. Now I'm an actor. So I did a lot of acting, and I got them involved in doing acting because I knew that some of them didn't know how to read or write. Some of them had university degrees, but I had to get everybody to understand the lesson. So I'd get them to role play it, and they loved it. And at the end of the day, I'd take about 40 minutes and I'd say, listen, we've worked hard enough. You guys have done a great job. Who here knows how to sing or tell a story? And, the first time they're in my class, they're kind of looking at each other and what's this? Where's he going with this? And then I'd see one hand kind of raising and, and another hand raising. Okay, you're going to tell a story, you're going to sing. Some great singers. My good. They'd grab the empty, water jugs at the back of the classroom and start pounding the drums.
Yeah.
Oh, my. Yeah. I loved it, even though I had no idea what they were singing about. My language assistant was trying to tell me as he's going along. He was either enjoying it. One guy was singing in this song. And everybody was laughing. And I turned around to my language assistant and I says, what is he singing about? Well, it was an arranged marriage, Paul. I said, yeah, okay. And on the wedding night, she took off her veil because she had been covered up until then. And yeah, okay. So what else? Well, she looked like a goat, and that's the whole thing. And so everybody's bursting out laughing, but we had a great time. Yeah. So I got the respect of 99.9% of the students that were there. And as it turns out, I got the respect of this one cadet who was a terrorist. And unbeknownst to me, actually was leading a little bit of a terrorist cell, getting instructions back from Iraq to kill internationals. So if we fast forward, 4 weeks, he's still in his training because he was there for 8. So he's at about the 7th week. And I was now in the advocacy and counseling division, counseling cadets, suicidal cadets. So again, my training, as a suicide, prevention officer or whatever, came in. I was counseling cadets because a lot of them would come to me and say, I can't stand it. I'm going to kill myself if I stay here. One of the cadets who used to come in to see me quite regularly said, there's going to be an attack on the academy. It's coming soon. I can't tell you exactly when. He says, but the cadets are gathering weapons. They're gathering sticks, rocks, anything sharp, that they can get their hands on. There's going to be an attack. So I went to our security and I said, there's going to be an attack. This is what I've heard. And their intelligence had heard the same thing. So it was business as usual. We went on and we did our training. And I would get to class or get to the academy earlier than most because my partner and I, my Finnish partner who worked in the office with me, we'd have a number of reports to give to the director suggesting which cadets ought to be, sent back home because they were unfit mentally or physically to continue, or keeping them there would result in further stress or distress to them or suicide, So we had our job to go see the director before any of the other teachers showed up at the academy. And we were walking through the desert. I think it was one April morning, and the sun was just coming up, and we're chatting and went to the director's office, got our paper signed, and as we're walking back to our office, 40 cadets or so came from behind a building. This was the day that they had chosen to attack, and they rushed us up. And some of them had rocks and sticks and a sharpened rock or whatever. And they surrounded my partner and I. We're in the middle of the desert, and we knew what was happening. And my partner, who was about a foot taller than me, he's a foot taller than me. He reaches down, he pats me on the head like he would a little puppy. He says, "This is going to hurt, little buddy."
Oh, Jesus.
And I looked up and I said, "Yeah, it's going to hurt." And the only thought that was coming through my mind at the time was I was never going to get to see my daughters again. And, now you realize, because they're starting to move in and now they're starting to push and they're starting to hit, that you only have one choice, and that is to fight. Even though you are fighting, what appears to be something that you can't win, you still fight with everything you got. And I made that decision that I was going to fight to the death, and we started getting beaten pretty bad. And all I heard as I was on the ground, and I was getting hit and kicked, and I heard, "Mr. Paul, Mr. Paul, Mr. Paul." That's all I heard, one voice from the back. And all of a sudden, he started shouting something in Arabic. Everybody stopped. The beating stopped, and they started moving away from us. And my head was in a daze. And you know how they say that stars sometimes, float around? I think that that's actually what happened to me. I could see stars. So maybe those cartoons weren't wrong. And when I finally regained my focus, I was looking for the cadet who was shouting, "Mr. Paul, Mr. Paul." He was my student from about 3 weeks earlier, the one who spoke perfect English and the one who actually had taken an interest in some of the things that I was saying, because he had met me after class a couple of times to talk. And he walks up, he has the biggest smile on his face, and he puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, "You and your partner, you got to get going. This is not going to be a good day." And all I could remember telling him is, "You?" And he says, "Just go. You should just get out of here." He had organized that, but he didn't know who the first 2 victims were going to be. So he came afterwards to see who was getting the life beaten out of them, and it turns out that he recognized me. And because of that connection that we made, he chose to save my life and my partner's life. So we got the hell out of there, got to our office, called security and said, "Don't let a soul into the academy, because today's the day someone's going to die if you do." And we got out of there. And to this day, I don't know what price that cadet had to pay for sparing my life, because he went directly against his terrorist cell's instructions of killing or maiming internationals.
Well, and this is how they control their subjects, or what do you call them? Many of these terrorists have they're being extorted themselves in order to do the will of whatever the cell is, right?
They are. You know what? You're right. See, I want people to, and this is one of the things that I talk about. I don't want us to label everybody, or to give a label, to everybody, assuming that we know what's going on with somebody. So a terrorist is not always a terrorist. Let me explain that, because a lot of people are going to go, I don't believe you, Paul.
Right.
Imagine this, because when I was working in Iraq and I was working at that academy, a 5-star Iraqi colonel who had an office near mine took a liking to me and used to call me in, and we'd have tea in the morning. And he'd say, "Paul, do you know what's going on here?" And I said, "Well, I got a pretty good idea." He says, "We've got terrorists here." And yeah. So he started to explain that not all terrorists are terrorists who want to join a jihad or who want to, kill or maim. Some of them are normal individuals who get approached by a recruiter. And the recruiter is looking for young men to carry out suicide missions normally. And they'll pick someone in a village and they'll go to them and they'll say, "We know that you're suffering. We know that you're married, you've got 3 or 4 children, your parents are here, you're not making it. So here's our proposition. You do one job for us, one job only, and your family will be taken care of forever. We will move them into a community and your children will go to school. We will feed them. We will clothe them. We will educate them. We will put your picture on a wall of honor, because you will be doing a great service for Allah. And all you need to do is just accept this one-time situation where we'll send you somewhere, but your family will be okay forever." Now, you can imagine if you're starving. If you're starving and there is no other option for you.
Yeah, and they can perceive it, I think, as getting out of the squalor and the situation that they're in, but then also this added benefit of supporting all these other people.
Correct. And here's the if that's a sales pitch, here's a clincher. I give you 24 hours to think about this. And if you don't, I come and I kill you all. And they do. They come back to those who say no, and they slaughter them all.
Hmm.
And some of my police, cadets who had gone against the warnings of terrorists had come to school, despite it, because they believed in fighting for their country. They'd come to see me when I was working in the advocacy, and they said, "Listen, I had a 10-minute call to my family last night, and I couldn't reach them, and they only had a 10-minute call per week." So it was a big deal because the families would all be waiting for their phone call. And sometimes the lines were down because they were at war, but sometimes it was just like, I can't get a hold of them. So I would research. My job was to get a hold of the police or whatever. And on 5 or 6 different occasions, I got the Iraqi police to actually, do an investigation, give me a call back and find out, yeah, their family was slaughtered. Baby was killed, parents were killed, everybody was killed. And there was a message at home. It's because they're here. So you can imagine, that's what they were living with.
So how do you deal with that, though, as the person who's there trying to help and then, being exposed to all these stories, that kind of vicarious trauma of hearing this kind of stuff every day?
And that's a good question. That was asked of me last night. How is it, we are never prepared to hear some of the stuff that we hear or to see some of the stuff that we see. But when you take on a particular profession, I think you have to build a little bit of a defense mechanism to not take it so emotionally or personalize it too much, to understand that you have a job to do. I have to detach myself in some way, but not appear detached.
Right.
But not let it, I can empathize with you or I can sympathize with you.
Yeah.
The one has me crying on my knees with you. The other one has me comforting you and supporting you and crying a little bit inside. And that's what we have to do as professionals every once in a while. We have to empathize, and remain professional. And it's after, we've had that encounter that sometimes, we have to say, what the hell just happened here? And how do I deal with this myself?
And that's on the other end. So a lot of not only law enforcement professionals, but anybody in a helping profession as dramatic as working with terrorists or potential terrorists to just working with the everyday human dramas within their own family. Many, many people don't deal with it or can't deal with it. How did you and your colleagues and in your profession, how do you deal with that? How do you release that from you? It must accumulate.
It does. And sometimes it comes out in different ways. For me, I don't know how I've made it, to tell you the truth. And I think it's because I continue to remind myself that I'm stronger than what happens to me, and that I've always been able to get back on my feet no matter what, and that I can continue, on this journey. And I'll tell you, Mark, there are some times where I'll sit and I look and maybe work is not coming in as quickly as I'd like or whatever. And I start to, go into that, that monologue in my head that starts talking negatively, the one that I wrote about in my book that says, no, you've got to put a stop to this because we are stronger than we believe ourselves to be, but we have to continue reminding ourselves everything is, everything is going to work out. But you've got to put the action and the effort into making things work out. So I've had to go back to my book every once in a while and read what I've written there to remind myself that I've got this.
Do you think that that's a skill set? Well, it sounds like it is. But I often think of myself and I talk to a lot of people who want to break free of the cycle that their parents or their life, their childhood, their upbringing, whatever, set for them. And every now and then you have these moments where you think to yourself, crap, that's exactly what dad would have said or mom or whatever. Yeah. So, that sounds like a skill set that you have that helps you to break free from that cycle of your own upbringing, a cycle that many, many people don't break free from because they don't have that kind of mindful approach to it, I guess, that metacognitive approach. Do you see it that way? Do you ever fear that you'll slip into that same place that your father did, for example, or that do you feel that you've learned enough over your experiences to be able to do something good with it for the rest of your life?
You know what? That is a very Very good question, because part of me, I might have a sliver of thought every once in a while that I could slip.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that it is my fight not to slip, and that I do believe what I wrote about. I do believe what I've experienced. And I know that even though some of us may get those thoughts like, could that happen? Yeah, it could, but you're not going to let it happen.
Right.
You are not a hostage to your circumstances. And I like to use, throughout my book, as you know, I like to say that, we are hostages to ourselves if we choose to be. And by that, I mean, is, we can take ourselves hostage just as effectively as someone, who takes us physical hostage. Absolutely. When we are taken physical hostage, we have no control over what's going to happen. We are really at their mercy. They dictate what's going to happen, and it is a dark world. Yeah.
And it turns out all the depression, at least this is how I've thought of it in myself, that I've experienced. Our depression is like a little terrorist inside our head. It tells us what we do, what we are. It tells us that it's going to give our family this relief. It tells us that it can give us the escape. It tells us all these lies.
That's right. That's right. Yes, you are right. And when that hostage taker, does have that control, it is then that you have to come out with your defense, like your army of defense, and that, you are the strongest, warrior, for yourself. It's really examining that internal monologue to see if it actually makes sense. I am not a product of my past. My past is something that happened to me. And I have to remind this, is that I didn't ask to be a victim of child abuse. I didn't ask to be, a victim of anything. It happened to me. Did I deserve it? No, I did not. And we all have to remind ourselves that if we are the victim of our past in some way, it is our right to unhostage ourselves from our past, to leave our past where it belongs, not to examine it too much, because if you examine it too much, I think you can do yourself more harm than to revisit something that's so painful.
Right. If you dive into it but don't ever come up for air, then what are you doing with it?
Yeah, right? You're drowning in it.
Right.
Like I could have decided, that hey, my dad, he beat me, and I mustn't have been good enough or whatever, and I can do that, and really distress myself and not live a fulfilled life. Or I can choose to say, you know what happened 5 minutes ago happened 5 minutes ago. I can't change it. If it was something that was bad, it wasn't my fault. And if it was my fault, I'll take responsibility for it.
Either way, you move on.
The future, I can plan for, but it hasn't happened yet, and it's not guaranteed. In 5 minutes from now, I could be dead. What do I have control over? I have control over this very moment. And right now, there are two people who are really special to me, and that's the two of you in this room. You matter.
My producer and I, for those who can't see us.
Yes, for those who, exactly. You guys, this is my moment. This present moment is what matters to me the most, is where I can make the most difference, is where I can actually, establish something or create something or experience something. 5 minutes ago doesn't exist. I can't go back and change it if I wanted to. I might be able to explain it,
right,
but I cannot be a hostage if something went wrong 5 minutes ago. If it was my doing, I can take responsibility, and I have to forgive myself if I've done something wrong. Before I forgive others, I have to forgive myself.
I read that as the essence, the entire heart of your book. Take control of your life, rescue yourself, and live the life you deserve. It's such a practical, but I think touching and personal account of how to do that, of how to really own the moment.
Thank you. It really is. It's about every one of us owning the present, and not living in the past. Planning for the future, of course, we all want to do that. But we have the greatest influence we have, the greatest power we have is in the moment.
Knowing what you know now, after this incredible life in progress, what would you tell that 7-year-old scared little boy in your house? You.
I would tell him that I would tell him that he has the power to make it or break it, that he is not a hostage to anything, and that whatever he's going through, he can get through as long as he decides to get through it. You know what? We are on a journey. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. If we stop walking forward, if we stop because it's too hard, then we often become too familiar with it. I talk about, in my book, the Stockholm Syndrome, when we start to empathize with a person who is abusing us or a circumstance we become too familiar with. They did experiments on dogs, in the past in which there were one electrified cage, a tunnel, and another cage that was unelectrified. And they'd put, it wasn't much of an electrical shock, but it was enough to shock the dog. And so they'd put the dog in and they'd watch the reactions where the dog would jump on this electrified cage, and some of them would see the little tunnel and go, maybe if I go through that tunnel, I won't get it anymore. And sure enough, they'd get to the second level, which was unelectrified. But some of the dogs would not think of doing that. So they would jump on the electrified cage and until they couldn't take it anymore. And then they would settle down and then they would relax because that became their reality. Isn't that what some people do in their lives? If they're living in an abusive home, they become so acclimatized to being shocked and abused and told, like I was when I was a kid, you're never going to amount to anything. That was my electrical shock. And I kept getting exposed to it. It became my life. Yeah, I believe that. Or if I'm being abused, if I'm in an abusive relationship, maybe I become so accustomed to it, it's my normality. This is normal for me. What else is there out there? Every once in a while, we have to stop, to discover what it is that's shocking us. Is it a belief system? Is it a lack of belief in ourselves? Is it because, somebody else has got power control over us? We cannot give anybody power control. We have that. We have to remind ourselves that we are stronger than our circumstances and that we can take back our power and control because nobody can take it from us. So sometimes we have to discover in the moment how strong we are. Am I okay? And am I happy where I am? And if I'm not, and this is called self-evaluation, if I'm not happy with what I'm experiencing now, whose job is it to get me out of it? It's mine, with the help of others. But I can. So telling my 7-year-old self that you can do anything you put your mind to and that you are nobody's hostage is what I would probably tell that little boy.
Beautiful advice, Paul Nadeau. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
All right, that's it. That's my talk with Paul Nadeau. Make sure you go pick up his book, Take Control of Your Life, Rescue Yourself, and Live the Life You Deserve. He's a really intense guy, but I loved hearing his stories because he's also so surprisingly warm and open with his experiences as well, stuff that would completely traumatize other people. And we chatted about that, of course. How do you actually work through that kind of thing when it's part of the job in some ways to be exposed to that kind of intensity and trauma and difficulty. And he uses his story so well, I think, to inspire people. So go pick up his book, check him out on social media. And if you get a chance to hear him speak, make sure you get out and do that. I'd also like to ask you to subscribe to the show, as I do every single week. Head over to Apple Podcasts, look up So-Called Normal, hit that subscribe button, leave us a rating, leave us some comments if you like, share the show with your friends. We have such a diversity of guests on here, and it's been such a pleasure for me to interview them all. If you want to check out a free trial of free, safe, effective, well-trained psychotherapy, for a free trial of it, head on over to betterhelp.com/Mark, enter the promo code Mark, M-A-R-K, that's me, and you can check out that free trial of online psychotherapy with some credentialed professionals at a time that works for you, on your schedule. See if you like it, and if not, fine, you can just unsubscribe from that. But if you like it, then it could change your life. I know psychotherapy sure helped me. So head over to betterhelp.com/Mark. You can also follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever else, at Mark Hennick, at MarkHennick, or markhennick.com as well. I think that's everything. You know what? Actually, I've been meaning to add on. We're 20 some episodes in now, almost 30 episodes in, and I never thank the production staff who helped me with this show. And I feel like we should do that. So to Adrian, to Kim, Kimberly, Allison here at Entertainment One, my fantastic editor, Dave Trafford. This is a team effort. It's me on the mic all the time, and I ask them sometimes, or at least I used to come on the mics with me, but they never do. But I really want to thank everybody for bringing us together, and I need to do that more often. So this has been So-Called Normal. I'm Mark Hennick. Thanks for listening.